Everybody.
What?
Where is everybody?
I don't know. One is here.
That's good. We're close.
We actually don't know if we're close or not.
Well, good. All right.
You're not filming yet, are you?
Huh?
Are you filming yet?
You know, the video's going, but I have the sound turned as low as it'll go, so I
I'll try
don't.
to drink my Coke before we.
That's
You guys
fine.
don't have a red light.
I know, I should.
That was the hardest thing to get the council members, new council members, to figure out, because the Central filmed all the city council meetings. And they just sat down, the camera just ran all the time, so they'd come in and get all set up, depending on how ambitious they were, or whatever. They'd be set up, and they had a big red light on the camera, but they'd come in and be doing, you know, 10 minutes before the meeting started, and you.
Yeah.
People thanking her.
Go ahead.
I am gonna turn the volume
It was
up
always
now,
kind of
though.
fun. I don't know.
Okay.
Mr. Hudson. Yo, what's happening?
Barry, do you have the actual map of the entire basin somewhere? Do we have that anywhere that we could, the whole?
The 91, but the map, the entire basin.
Yeah, the actual descriptive outline of the basin,
Oh.
as it goes down to the river.
We have the hub maps.
Yeah, we have the hub maps.
That shot them up.
Yeah, was that based on hub tens or?
That's all your hub 12 stuff. I think USGS established, so DOE just used to them.
So those basins are hub 12s?
Well, no, we use the hub maps in terms of outlining the.
I know, but there's different levels. So-
DOE's 91 maps didn't necessarily parallel.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So do we have DOE's outline of the closed basin, the whole thing? Can we, is there any way you can get one of those for me?
Yeah, of course.
We're officially in session. Is Jim coming back to you now?
Did he say anything about not coming back? Does he doesn't have a test maybe or something?
I don't think so.
He's just probably.
He has Maurice's employee evaluation report. That's all that's on there.
Well, relatively speaking, this map doesn't show a huge number of parcels in the French Creek.
Everything that's, so, everything that's not that red color, that's clear, that's inside this line,
Yep.
is an undeveloped parcel. So, I mean, it's this, I mean, in relative terms, yeah, you're right. When you put them all together, there's 1,100 in the overall thing. This one had, I think, as far as I could see, just in a cursory glance, I think this one had the most.
In the whole basin.
But I'm not sure. That was we knew that was part of, we have never, the Board of County Commissioners has not actually adopted their bylaws in quite a while. And I remember going through this last year, and Tanya looking through it and seeing that and going, no, these need changes, but we never did get back to where we adopted those.
Right, Stella, had asked, and I said, we don't have any adopted recently, but here's what we have. And then she sent it back and said, could you look at them and see if they,
That just needs to say gets deposited into the county clerk expense fund.
but that was the section that I saw you didn't know.
Yeah.
So that, I told her that section.
The huck bound is this corner, right there. The rest of the huck boundary is exactly the same, I'm just looking at the
So
chart.
that's the blue line.
Well, this is the closed basin,
That's restricted.
restricted
So
area.
does the, does it, but it doesn't go all the way down to the river right there.
It's
So,
exactly the same with the huck and the,
And then we're closed basin.
yeah.
so this doesn't have the restricted portion on it then too?
Yeah.
That's the blue line.
That's blue.
But that's also the huck boundary on the side. which-
Except for,
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but where is the, so it actually has to come down to the river, doesn't it?
It doesn't. The closed basin,
No, not necessarily.
and it doesn't in French Creek, I was just looking at it.
You're kidding me.
No.
Some of the hucks actually go back and forth across the river.
So that's the actual whole boundary. Okay,
Oh.
but, so are they saying the whole thing is restricted then?
Not the whole huck.
Some of the stuff up above is not.
Right.
yeah, this,
But
that's the
everything-
restricted area,
So the restricted area comes down to the blue line.
correct.
Right?
The huck boundary would be
So-
exactly the same
You remember,
except for.
remember off the top of your head what huck this is down here then?
I think that's McFarland, I'd have to go double check that though, but I think it's
The
McFarland.
hut boundary is exactly the
Is
same as
McFarland
what?
closed?
Restricted
Closed
area,
basin.
Okay.
except for
Right
Is
here.
McFarland closed?
that,
Yes.
just connect those two dots.
Come over here, Joe.
So it might be McFarland.
So we might need McFarland if it goes down to the river. 'cause-
If you want big, he can do it because he's got it up him as long.
Huck
Well,
boundary.
we'll go ahead and do
All
that.
of this exactly.
Yeah, I picked up on that too, because foolishly assume that your hucks would come down to the river.
Right.
Little
That doesn't work.
Forest Service.
Sometimes it comes down short of the river and the huck from the side comes up.
Okay, so you're saying that McFarland actually goes through the river
I
and
think
comes
it's,
up.
I might be wrong on which one it is.
There's another.
There's
huck
another
Huck.
down
hut
there.
that goes down and through.
But-
And we think it's a closed one?
Look at that.
I think you're right. I
So
think it's
I think it's McFarland. The closed portion doesn't go all the way down, I don't believe, again, I just looked at it for another question, so I didn't look at it for the specificity.
Well, sorry.
And I wanted to-
If I put it on there.
If you guys get a chance,
So
go ahead and make,
that,
do this same thing,
With
Any
McFarland.
from the far.
I
or
can't see it.
whatever it butts up against.
Okay.
Look, I can see that over there. I might go get up there.
But the 11, it was made for this scale.
Okay.
Did you hear that, whichever butts up against, can we
Whatever
have that?
this huck is.
Which I think is McFarland, but I could be wrong.
And map up. I can do that really fast, but it won't have that ownership on it.
Why don't you just go ahead for now and just do
Yeah.
the huck boundary and the restricted area. We'll worry about the assessor's overland ownership and all that stuff later.
So, those are, oh, okay, you got rid of them.
So what you're saying is that the entire, French Creek subbasin is closed, period. Okay, so that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, okay, French Creek is listed as closed,
Right.
but of the huck, of course, the genie,
Right.
it's not closed.
Okay. Up on the forest.
But everything, basically everything in private property
Everything here
is closed.
Right, no, this is part
A
of
whole
the,
bunch of DNR.
like this is not, well, this isn't part of that, right?
That's forest, I guess that's a private.
Yeah, but
That's
it's,
all forest.
well, I think it's still part of the intake, so I wanted to make sure precision of language as
No,
you
no,
reach,
understood.
sorry.
But down here,
Right,
we have all this stuff going on,
So when-
it's in the restricted area.
Yes,
When you put your arm over that dividing line, is it the road?
essentially,
Okay.
I mean, that's an easier way to, it's a little bit different, but it's an easier way to visualize it.
So yeah, McFarland,
So whatever the hook is down here, I think you're right, I think it's McFarland.
well, it probably doesn't matter because McFarland, Squaw Creek, 100 Mile, whatever you wanna call it, whatever they, did they actually go through and change the name?
They did, but I don't remember what, I think it is Mountain.
Well, we changed the name of the road. Did they ever
I think
change
that
the
the
name of
like, I
the
think,
creek and the ridge and all that stuff?
I'm guessing they didn't change the name of the hook or whatever.
So,
But we'll find-
French Creek, Black Canyon Creek, Old Squaw Creek, McFarland Creek, Gold Creek, those are all close, and so those are probably,
Golden Cow would have been revision. But he'll do your map for whatever this is down here.
Can you explain what a huck is?
it's a USGS.
Hydrological unit control
I forget what slash C.
number, most of the counties.
So it defines an area.
Most of the counties in.
It can go, but it can go different. It can go 12s, 10s,
right,
8s,
Under levels.
and
the smaller the number, the larger the
the
house.
smaller the number, the larger the area that it takes in.
Okay, thank you.
They're used to divide hydrologically connected areas.
Okay,
All right.
Just to be
Are you
complicated.
Katie?
yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to sign in?
No,
I-
I just get you and Emily mixed up.
Oh, okay.
My
Yeah,
apologies,
sorry.
so just checking.
What's this?
That is a little version.
Swarm Creek.
That was the last
Swarm.
one we were talking about. this one.
So the, anything that's within this blue line and doesn't have the red, red little dots over it, we can't move on. Because of the closed basin.
Oh.
So killing two birds with one stone, commissioners. First item on your agenda is, of course, an update for the comprehensive plan. The end of this week is the end of the scoping period for the environmental impact statement. Fish and Wildlife has submitted theirs. I've gone through, we're beginning to build our comment response sheet. Of course, the idea behind the scoping period is to identify the significant issues around which we'll write the environmental impact statement. How that meshes with this discussion is what you'll see in the environmental impact statement is essentially the same analysis, at least in broad strokes. So we're gonna take, breaking it out, you might recall before when we did the EIS on the zone code, we broke it out by geographic regions, kind of arbitrary, tied around school districts and things like that. What we're doing this time, what I'm doing this time, is breaking it out by RIA. So those RIAs that intrude into Okanogan County, will probably leave those fairly coarse in terms of the buildable lands analysis. That, of course, will be based on current zoning, and then for the alternatives, I'll just have to make some arbitrary assumptions in terms of how the different alternatives might relate then to an underlying lot size.
Don't you mean like educated assumptions?
Well, what I'll do is use what you see in many comprehensive plans, or zone codes, I should say. They generally break out by 5s, by 10s, by 20s, 40s. You know, what we can do is take a look. What I'll do is look at if it's in a RIA that, it's gonna be my judgment, final analysis, probably predominantly 5-acre zoning. I'll do an analysis of the 5 shifted to 20. What would be the potential for underlying costs? That sort of thing. Kittitas County, for instance, has a 40-acre zone in the timber resource designation. There's nothing magical about any of those numbers, but we need to have some for comparison. So, but it'll be broken out. Essentially, what you'll see in the like 49 and 48, we'll probably break it out. It'll probably be in chart form. We'll break it out by your different hub basins. So, like we did with the Tongue, free water availability study area, Upper Tongue, Lower Tongue, Tamarack Spring. What I'm looking for in addition, the buildable lands analysis is your kind of your baseline analysis. Then we're gonna lay that against the actual history, building history. That's been issued for the last, I think we had data back to 2000. I'll probably not go back farther than that, but we'll bring it up to date, so you have.
So you're gonna break that down by, by reach then, like in RIA 48, will you break that down by reach?
Yep.
Okay.
So say the baseline will be the RIAs, in terms of how it's all organized. So envision, if you will, in the environmental impact statement on water quality and quantity, will be essentially a chapter, RIA 50, or section, I should say, RIA 50, RIA 52, RIA 48, RIA 49. Obviously with varying detail in terms of the analysis, because some of them, for instance, one of them's almost entirely on the Okanogan reservation. So we'll get what history and some of the stuff we do for them, land division, for instance, we deal with all those applications. The idea being, we're trying to create the blend, if you will, of what could happen, what has historically happened, and how the alternatives and those approaches might impact that. We call the alternatives, one, no alternative, no action. The other, a much more, if you will, restrictive approach, trying to drive people into your city expansion areas and your unincorporated villages to a lesser extent. Now, one of the things that will inevitably lead to is the discussion of restriction versus incentive in terms of how you impact that settlement pattern. Because that's what we're talking about. You recall, we picked the medium range population, and the alternatives deal, or rather evolve around how you deal with that population. So, I guess since we were gonna talk about this, after this morning, I figured we'd talk about this too, in terms of how I'm gonna build the EIS. Now, there may be other issues. Fish and Wildlife didn't really introduce any more issues around. Their focus obviously is less on comprehensive plan than on critical areas, other than your comprehensive plan, its policies can certainly drive the critical areas ordinance too, in the final analysis. So at this point, we're still looking at water quality and quantity, your traffic, and your critical areas. So anyway, just thought I'd kind of review all of that, in terms of how we're gonna build the baseline of the EIS, and talking the draft, obviously. After the planning commission hearing, there may be a different approach we'll take, or an amplification of that approach, I don't know.
How many comments or not? Have you got a lot of comments on this, or few?
Well, just one from Fish and Wildlife right now, in terms of the current scope and period. See, it ends on Friday.
And you only have one comment?
During the holiday season, well, that's kind of what I figured. I'll have by the end of the week. We'll get comments from Future Wise, we'll get comments from the NBCC. At least, we may get it.
But up to this point, you only have
Up to
one?
this point, I have one from Fish and Wildlife. Okay. One of the things that Fish and Wildlife does talk about, and it's in your comprehensive plan, it's not new ground, is the importance of your hunting and fishing, your outdoor recreation to the local economy. And we actually have some language in the comprehensive plan that recognizes that. Once upon a time, way back, we had an economic development section, and we actually enlisted the aid of the Economic Alliance to create. That came out by the previous board when we started to streamline the comprehensive plan. We had one on affordable housing, we had one on economic development, both of those came out. So we've left it.
Like a quick question,
Yes.
just to that point.
Okay.
So, there was a point in time when the 173-548 got written, where there was comments that said that there should not be river access all over the place, because then it might get, the fishery might get outfished. that's, when they talk about, you know, the ability to fish and things like that, I mean, that's, is there a double-edged sword there? Is it like, yeah, you have to, you know, you wanna have access for people to be able to do that, because that's an economic generator, but at the same time, how much access is really,
Their
would be a
comments,
detriment.
their comments focus more on preservation and habitat
Okay.
to support the fisheries. They didn't talk about access so much. Your comprehensive plan talks about access to the public lanes. I don't recall off the top of my head, it talks specifically about the access to the shoreline and things like that. It references shoreline master program, which of course, that's a component of the shoreline master program. Maybe something to turn my thumb back down and see. Anyway, moral of the story, this is dealt with fairly generally in your comprehensive plan right now. Talk about your unincorporated towns and their importance as regional service centers. We talk about the city areas, and because of the urban services they can provide, their importance to economic development. We talk about the importance of public lands as it relates to our customs and culture and our baseline economics in terms of hunting, fishing, outdoor recreation. And that may be okay. I just thought I'd run that flagpole. As we move through this thing, we want to pull some of that out into a more specific sector.
So why was it taken out? What was the thinking when it was taken out?
Complicated length. The comp plan, and this was actually before the freeze. I don't recall if you were on yet, Commissioner, when those were pulled out. It's the length of the document. We had a lot of stuff in it. And the decision at the time was to pull out some of those specific sections to deal with more general statements.
So the economic development portion could be relative and affect the settlement pattern. So when we look at economic development opportunities in Okanogan County and lands that are available to do industrial commercial use, I guess the question comes to mind is, is that only identified within the urban city expansion areas? You follow what I'm saying here is the economic development portion could very well affect the land use pattern as we establish how that works. And if we have minimum requirement districts or districts that allow economic development type things like industrial commercial uses in areas where they may not be appropriate, that seems like that section should drive some of that.
What about the other way around? Where they could be appropriate, but they aren't?
Same thing, depending on what the use is and what kind of land use conflict that would present. Plus the cost to serve. So is it?
What kind of prompted me to think about this again was Fish and Wildlife's tie of the habitat preservation, not necessarily simply for the sake of preserving habitat, but they did make a fairly strong tie between the support of your hunting and your fishing, obviously through habitat, from their perspective, to a point, there's a point here, tied to economic development. So, okay, if I'm tracking your point correctly, as we begin to look at economic development, whether we boil it down to a specific section or keep with our more general statements scattered through the document, we tend to think of residential development, or in my opinion, residential development as economic development. And true to some extent, it's supportive certainly of economic development, you have to have housing stock. We talked about this the other day, you have to have housing stock to do recruitment, you have to have housing stock to a point for retention, those sorts of things. But, and here's where I think we're on the same page, if you're going to focus on industrial commercial development, if you're going to put that in your city expansion areas because of the presence or potential presence of urban services, it begs the question, are you going to co-site residential development there, or you're gonna rely on areas to absorb your residential development. And, you know, we're talking very general policies to this point, because we don't have the historic growth populations. You know, we're not gonna absorb 1,000 people a year, so we're not talking horrendous pressure, but just something to think about. Because keeping in mind, the comp plan eventually informs the zoning code. So how we do all of that, in the end, will affect our settlement pay.
So, me though, looking at this, okay, so Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it tie. Hey, county, you should, you know, do, habitat, you know,
Okay.
protection.
No net loss.
Yeah, no net loss, things like that, because hunting and fishing is economic vitality. Okay, now I'm gonna go the other direction. The managed game working to our, economic development for hunting and fishing. True. Okay, so if we're thinking about one way, then we have to go the other direction and think about, okay, if they've made this statement that the habitat is so important to our economics for hunting and fishing, then I would say that the game management in this county is extremely important to the hunting and fishing economics.
Fair enough, I mean, that would logically follow. I guess more the point I'm making, I'm kind of wandering around here, as we start talking about economic development, we have from time to time, we'll eventually need to mesh those different policies together. Right now, and I guess I'm going back to some of the problems that keep coming up when we talk about the marijuana or the cannabis regulation. You know, once upon a time, we essentially had one zone in cannabis. But now we're through, really. I mean, we have a whole list of zones, most of which don't appear on the ground, or if they do, they only appear literally by dozens of acres scattered liberally about. Industrial zoning, for instance, very little of it, most of it's centered around the airport. Your residential suburban, we finally put, suburban residential, we finally put some on the East Lake corridor. It appears, no other than I'm aware of, city expansion areas, and we'll get to that. What I'm doing, I guess, is priming the pump as we begin to work on this, as we look at economic development. Fish and Wildlife is kind of brought it up in my mind, but as we work on that, we need to try to, and this is the hard part, we need to try to get ourselves away from what is always the gorilla in the room, and that's lot size for residential, rural residential development, and begin to think about some of this other stuff. You know, one zone that allows everything didn't necessarily work that well, and we found that with the marijuana. It kind of worked because there were a lot of things going on. But with the cannabis industry beginning to expand and beginning to cite with little other specific regulation at that time, it popped up in some interesting places. Perfectly legal in terms of the online zone. So anyway, just something to think about as those, I'll say subtleties are not that subtle in many respects, but yeah, it's kind of a different way of thinking than perhaps the county has thought.
So it is, and it's just relative to a resistance to control, land use control.
Well, and then Commissioner Detro recalled these conversations that I've introduced from time to time. While there's a lot of people think a lot of flexibility in your zoning is a beautiful thing, what we're seeing now, I mean, how many conditional use permits have we had up in the Methow that have had fierce resistance because the zoning was too flexible? Many, not everybody, I understand that, but many would argue that a more specific zoning that allows things that are compatible with those areas is in some respects simpler in the final analysis. Usually doesn't invite as much litigation.
The flexibility can happen, but there has to be a plan on how the flexibility works. Flexibility is not no rules, and people that found that out, they found out that, you know, if I don't have some sort of a control or caveat or something that goes along with flexibility,
anyway, just kind of a general discussion as, have an update for the comp plan.
On that economic development piece then, it really, the most important parts of it is that what we recognize as part of our economy. And so the point being made, life isn't the point that they need to make. I think that we understand that we have an economy that's recreation based, and it's based on natural resources, outdoors, the availability of those. So I think that even, doesn't our logo still have that?
Mhm.
It's on the door of the vehicles. And so, do we subscribe to that? If we subscribe to that, then we look at how that pattern works and how it relates to those other areas that we're identifying for land use and how those land use areas look. So,
I mean, their primary point, this just got me thinking about this, they're the ones that happened to be on my desk at the time. Their primary point was an approach under critical areas and no
yeah.
which is actually, I think, a good approach to take. You recall Shoreline Master Program takes a no-net loss approach, but the case law for critical areas actually took a protective stance. You'd have to enhance, which could degrade snapshot in time was the phrase they always employ. Now they introduce the idea that there's site-specific no-net loss, and then there's more of a jurisdictional no-net loss, the entire county, if you will, which in some respects is a more flexible approach to critical areas management, rather than locking in time what might be on the ground. You actually, then it introduces the idea, which is actually essentially what the voluntary stewardship program introduced in critical areas protection for agricultural activities, with the idea that you could take more of a no-net loss approach, which before was not what the GMA's critical areas requirements allow. So anyway, just an observation out front.
Yeah. So incentive versus restriction is what.
Well, we'll get to that sooner or later. If you're going to, let's just, as we work through our alternatives, let's assume that there's some momentum into the idea that as much as practical, we try to direct the growth that we believe we're going to get into your unincorporated town, or excuse me, incorporated towns in your city expansion area. Do you do that by doing your best, working in concert with the cities to make it desirable to develop there? Talking pre-zoning, you're talking infrastructure extension, those sorts of things that make it more efficient for people to settle there, or do you just make it possible or harder to settle around? That's what it comes down to.
Right growth in the right places.
Pardon?
I said, my deal is right growth in the right place. So, if it's not black and white to me, where you restrict it, you make it go here. It's the right use in the right place. So, that gives you flexibility in your comprehensive plan. And then the right growth in the right place means what kind of efficiencies to create for counties. And I think that I was looking at some statements even by politicians in other counties that state that, right? And very conservative people. They state that, their job is to make sure that the growth is efficient, creates efficiencies.
One place where we'll wrestle with that, we've added some fairly prescriptive language in terms of wildfire protection. But now we'll have to wrestle with the school of thought. What does that mean? Does that mean you create a good clustering ordinance that puts everybody there with open space around it, the idea that you're protecting a smaller footprint? Or, as someone prescribed, it means you scatter people out on much bigger lots, and then everyone takes care of their own defensible space. The one theory being, if you cluster them all up, they just all burn up all at the same time. Which in California actually proved to be the case in a couple of spots.
relatively high densities too.
Or with this format, yeah, you know, this house isn't gonna catch that house on fire, but you also theoretically need 3 pumper trucks now if you do residential protection. I don't know what the right answer is. You can find examples where both have worked or neither have worked, and find analysis.
Well, then get into a little more detail, is that, you know, you create a tic-tac-toe thing here. If you then overlay the landscapes onto it, including the critical areas onto one parcel, depending on how big it is, there's something that tells you where the appropriate place to cluster is, both for fire and for access, especially if it's mountainous or hilly or something like that. So that's where flexibility comes into for me too. And it's cheaper to do that, and you see that in exempt subdivisions. I know that you were doing that just for illustrative purposes, but still, it, you know, around, what's the landscape look like, what's there? And so if you put a stream on that, and a wetland over there, and a hillside over there, and then that shows you where there's restriction and where the roads can be, and get into that just a little bit, you can do a development that makes some sense. And essentially, that's what a lot of this stuff is based on, is the old Ian McCarn design with nature stuff.
So obviously, we're not making decisions today.
No, but it's conceptually,
But these are the sorts of things we will wrestle through, and in your comprehensive plan, all of the drafts so far, it has us, essentially, a plan objective that talks about the advantages and frustrations. Sometimes you can mesh them together. If, back to our buildable analysis, if based upon prospective water quality, and obviously 48 is gonna be different than 49 is arguably gonna be different 2 years from now than it is today, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Well, one of the simplest ways, obviously, to reduce the numbers in your buildable lands analysis is to increase the lot size. You haven't got as many lots if they're all required to be 40 acres in size, and if they're allowed to be 5. It's just simple math. You're still only issuing the same amount of building permits, you're still doing all that in terms of your historical build out, but you can't control the numbers to a point. But on the other side of the coin, to your point about putting it where it belongs, do you then create a fairly large underlying lot size, but then put in a strong clustering allowance where if you have the water, if you have the water, if you have transportation, you can reduce those lot sizes and cluster.
that might make sense. Something else that we probably should consider as we get through the scoping process is to probably list what drives our decisions. I know that's a little, you know, basic and fundamental, but I think for all of us, when we look at our land use plan, I think that we should have a listing of what drives our decision making.
But this is strictly my opinion, but I know when we get pushback about the idea of larger lots, it isn't necessarily someone with 100 acres who thinks they can get 100 1-acre parcels or even 25-acre parcels. It's essentially, and this, I can demonstrate this with our application. It's the one parcel that we want to put off, one lot, and sell the rest of it or whatever, and they just don't want a lot of land.
Right.
They have their house and their shop, they want 2 acres around that, or 3, and the rest of it, they're gonna get rid of. Now, in the Methow, we have a little bit of a different scenario in that you have folks who have a relatively, comparatively speaking, small lot, they wanna bust it off and sell the other half. Now, I don't know how much of it's accurate or no, but at least, again, anecdotally, it seems that many of the folks in our lot, we don't have a lot of applications. And from my perspective, the folks who are doing that already have a lot. So it's a very specific project for a very specific thing. And those are the ones who most of the time we push back on those areas and went to larger lot sizes. They're not making 20 lots, they're making 2. Anyway, I'd say, we're not looking for decisions,
No, no, that's why I was bringing up the fact that when we're looking for decisions, it's important for us to know, I think, what drives our decisions. You know, so if your primary motivation for making a decision a certain way is individual landowners' rights to do something, then what's the limitations to that? What do we do with that sort of decision-making criteria? And so if that's what's driving it, then we're a little less likely to make exceptionally efficient decisions, because we're taking a philosophy, if you will, and then applying that. And so I asked, is my so if we have lots that we create, they are such that it doesn't cost us, it doesn't increase the cost. The other thing is that what drives our decision making is creating lots for a tax base. That's something that we need to think about. Is that what drives our thinking? Is economic development? If we're talking about economic development, is creating those lots critical to economic development? You know, so those are what drives the decisions. And people ask me that, what drives your decision making?
I guess WRIA state is not mine to pick, but WRIA has an objective in all this. If we can tailor our toolbox, now here I'm talking subdivision code, zone, if we can tailor that to allow for those very specific situations, as opposed to, because we have a few folk that want to create 2-acre lots, we scatter the whole countryside with 2-acre zoning, which essentially then the challenge we run into with the zoning code is, and it's better than us, but if it's too general, then you're making decisions, site-specific basis, but the line between careful analysis and arbitrary and capricious is a very wavy thing at that point. So I guess what I would like to see is a tie between what you all believe we want to accomplish in the comprehensive plan to those specific bodies of regulation where we can accomplish that, if that makes sense.
It does. So let me ask you this though, if you wanted to try to accomplish something, but there are rules in place that do not allow for that, how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, obviously, if they're your rules.
And I don't mean like doing something illegal. Not at all. I just mean.
Can I take a shot at that? That comprehensive plan is the basis for that. And so if you want something and your rules don't accomplish that, subsequent to that comprehensive plan, the toolbox that you're talking about is then equipped with the right tools to accomplish that comprehensive plan wants to do. And so if you today have rules that don't allow you to accomplish what's in the comprehensive plan as we adopt it, after the comprehensive plan is adopted, then those rules are adjusted.
Well, I mean, we always have
Within a particular framework of rules, but you are not going to, as far as I'm concerned, argue with those making the rules unless that comprehensive plan clearly says something practical and pragmatic.
I shouldn't say will always happen, but we've had it for a long time. You're outside restrictions. I mean, Camel Gwynn says what Camel Gwynn says. And so 100 acres and 1 acre zoning, can they get 100 1-acre lots? No. Not under the Camel Gwynn scenario, unless they have a water right or have some other source of water. It can't happen. It's just not gonna happen. So
it's
kind of back.
But to make sure that we we understand, we gotta make sure that we understand what we're trying to do before we look and see if the existing rules are effective.
Understood. I guess my point, right now, we use Campbell Glen, we use a lot of other things as external restrictions on what people can apply. Our zoning, for instance, allows you to apply for a lot of things that the other outside restrictions will never let you have. So the zoning would appear to be on the ground to allow for that one in a whatever opportunity. If someone has a water right, they can vertically go through all the steps, then they can do this sort of thing. As opposed to baseline zoning that allows an application that's practical to go through the system. So I guess in my world, be better to have tools in the box that allows for those scenarios where you brought water with you, or you can hook up to an existing water supplier, or whatever. Then that allows you the opportunity to create more intense development. And you don't necessarily do that through zoning. Zoning can open the door to. You would see those tools in your subdivision regulation. You'd see those tools in Title 20 if we stay the course on that. That's my point. Just, I'd say kind of priming point, I guess, as we get through our comprehensive planning process, that's really just our philosophical statement with whatever varying level of detail you all are happy with. But then we got to get down in the weeds and figure out where those tools to make that happen are going to exist. So, and that's, we're at the very fledgling stages of that. The scoping in perfect world will tell us what folks out there are thinking are the important issues to analyze as we move down the path through that discussion. So, anyway, I guess just one of many discussions we're having. And of course, the planning commission gets their first crack at it, so. Anything on the comprehensive plan? So the end of the story is the end of the week, is January scoping period, so. Then we'll begin to write around those issues. And this is not remarkably dissimilar from the level of analysis that we do. I don't know, what Dean bring over for you. This is all too cool.
This one's French Creek right here.
Okay. So it must be the old cooling.
Where that one is. Oh, yeah, you're right. Cool.
That's a hug title. Maybe you need Danny's too.
Well,
Those are your boundaries of the hubs.
Right. So where do they draw the boundaries of the,
He hasn't put that on here yet. We have that you call it the water drop analysis.
yeah.
That, it's not on this one yet, so
Okay.
we'll keep layering stuff on, do that as well.
So I think that like Watson Draw is actually outside of French Creek. Watson Draw. Well, it's in, I think. No, but I think it's in, still in WRIA 48, but there was some concern that it might be in the French Creek closed basin.
One thing that I've had to work through is sometimes these up names have nothing to do with the particular creek or whatever that goes through it and is closed, so we've had to kind of deal with that from time to time. Where you'll have a basin name, but the the actual closed tributary isn't in it. Something around, or it runs out of one end to the other, and all sorts of different things. So that's why we have to mesh the HUC boundaries with those 91 maps, with the new maps as we get them. And we looked at all of them before we made a decision on anything. But we'll keep cranking them out. Let's see, RIA 49. I will give these to the clerk of the board. These are the appointment letters that we've generated so far for your signature. Those are the ones that the groups have put forward, or the names that were on that list that you have looked at. Obviously, we're not sending out appointment letters for the initiating governments. And I don't believe, although I may be wrong, I don't think they got around to the alternates, but they may have. We're still kind of working our way through the other irrigation districts. Those who have sent us names are on the list. Some of them, you recall in our discussion, trying to figure out if it's actually irrigation districts or water system provider or whatever. So it's not exhausted yet, but it's a good start. The commissioners wanted to sign those, so that's how we crafted it. Next meeting is Thursday. And you posed a question a couple weeks back now, Commissioner Branch, about whether you thought the membership was maybe hanging up our grant application and all that stuff. And I tried to call Vanessa and I couldn't get a hold of her today. What I am wondering if it isn't hinging in part on our operating procedures, because that has started to come up more frequently in conversation, not with Vanessa, but with others. I never reported out to you, talking to the Colville representatives. That's an important part of their decision, whether to simply sit as technical advisors,
Right.
or actual voting members. And I assume what we're going, that's just thinking out loud. The old debate, consensus versus majority, isn't beginning to shape up here. Vanessa Brinkhouse, wanted, it is on the agenda, wanted the discussion about their operating procedures. So we'll probably get into that deeply come Thursday to see what the thoughts of the planning unit are.
So that's both the colleges and the tribes?
Ecology, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Tribes already stated.
Okay. Yeah.
But we still don't have I don't even have an approved application yet. We don't have contracts yet, which actually rolls into my next subject. We had 3 submittals to our RFQ. They have been distributed to the planning unit members. They went out last Friday, consistent with your request that they make a recommendation. I don't know if we'll get to that. Thursday, it's on the agenda, because I'm not sure how long it's gonna take to hash out the operating procedures. As you know, that can go on for a fair amount of time. That said, without the contract, I don't have any money at this point. I'm assuming, but subject to your direction to the contrary, that you will want to enter into any agreement with any facilitator until we know we have the money to pay them, or conversely, we can front the bill up front with the hope of being reimbursed. Observations?
Well, I'm not involved in your conversation with Vanessa, and I guess it's the comfort level that I would have in regard to that conversation and the money coming through and when it came through.
I assume the money's coming. I haven't heard from anybody the idea that we don't do it a particular way, we won't get the grant. I don't know that that's why we don't have a contract. I'm just thinking out loud here.
So,
But we may be a bit out.
yeah, I'm thinking out loud too, okay?
Fair enough.
So, the expenditures that we are talking about is mostly staff time
so far it's all my staff time and
Yeah.
a few published notices.
Right. I guess the only thing that I would suggest, if we get into any kind of agreement with the facilitator, that they just understand the payment is, we could front the money up front, or we could say, well, payment's coming.
Well, that I guess was part of the discussion I've introduced. I mean, I have, in my professional services line, we'll probably be looking at some kind of supplement based upon whatever contract we end up with. So we could on paper,
Yeah. We just want to make
front
sure.
the expenses. I guess the question is, are the commissioners interested in doing that? Or would you prefer that we not, and, because that's gonna be when the hard costs start to come.
Yeah, the concern I have is the time we're spending not getting started.
Say, at this point, we're assured the money's there, we're assured we'll eventually get it. I do not have a funding agreement with the department.
I think the
I
other,
think we need to get it all put together.
I think the other piece of it is.
I don't think we want to put any money out for facilitator contractors. No.
Well, the only thing that's gonna worry about is that the time frame keeps getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
So, what,
The
What
other
are they
thing,
gonna, what are they gonna do for, if we don't meet
or do it for us?
or opted to not do anything? Then it was imputed on us.
question then, first of all, we'd want to make sure that anything, if we did that, and that doesn't sound like we're heading that direction, but if we did that, wanted to make sure that anything that we did was retroactive, that we
Well,
could pay for it.
Saying that, of course, would be part of the funding
Yes.
contract, California back. Now, they
Yes.
tell us, you recall, I reported this out before, that they're prepared to go back to the actual adoption of 6091. So January of 2018 is where we're keeping our own record in terms of expenses incurred so far. Now, that said, I don't have that in a contract at this point. I'm sure they meant everything they said, but I don't have it in a contract.
And then the other thought I had was beginning the process of the procedural part of this thing, how we do business. I mean, we can do that ourselves. I'm not totally excited about that because, I'd rather that the consultant actually was doing that, but we could do that.
We could, Vanessa's kind of, to my knowledge, so far, based on our past discussions, is kind of leading that discussion based upon not that there are many that have done anything yet, but some have, in the 2019 deadline, we've gone through this process, so there's some examples out there.
Yeah,
I don't know what they say,
we should check that out, I guess.
but she's kind of leading that discussion, so it isn't necessarily the county
Yeah.
that's doing that.
Right. And hopefully, we're not the subject of their learning experience with those other processes, it's because it could change because they have that experience, yeah.
I know in some circles, there's been some consternation expressed that I and my crew are doing some of the baseline analysis. I'm trying very hard to not get too deep into that, because at some point, the goal is to hand this to the facilitator, and certainly they, working with the planning unit, can begin to craft the level of information, the type of information that they're looking for. The stuff we're doing is the stuff the facilitator's gonna come to us to help do anyway.
Right.
Because it's the assessor's.
So we're trying to anticipate what.
So, I mean, I know some questions are going to get asked, so we're trying to get those answered up
Yeah.
front.
One advantage that I think we have is that some of those members, and a good portion of those members, been through this already, so at some point, when the organizational part of it all comes together, you're gonna start making very good progress. Because you've got the experience behind you.
The question I have on that is still, it comes down to this thing where the 6091 has language in it different than the watershed planning act.
Oh, very much so.
And so some of that is, it says something about procedure that I don't understand yet, whether they mean it. And that's that consensus word that they use in it. Is, you know, how are they gonna apply that? And that sounds to me like they're still figuring that out unless they've done that in those other planning meetings.
See, I haven't heard, I haven't gotten any specific direction from DOE, you have to do it this way or what.
Yeah, okay. Cause I'm just thinking about what the statute
Yeah, no,
says.
understood. You know, to your point, Commissioner, yes, we have people that have been involved in this thing from day one that want to continue to be involved. We'll have to work through the fact that some of the stuff, they're being directed by the legislature to now do it, very things they didn't want to do
Right.
before. You know, and then they had reasons for not wanting to do that, well, now it's not an option. Hopefully, you know, we'll embrace our mission, if you will, and do the things we have to do. We didn't get any option. 6091's fairly directive on a couple of key points. Now you got some latitude in terms of perhaps of how to accomplish some of those things. And according to Vanessa, some of the RIAs are actually kind of leaping over, if you will, tier 1 and tier 2 to tier 3 and trying to come up with mitigations that aren't water for water, time for time. Now, that's it. No one has been approved yet. So,
Right, so there are some challenges there that we didn't see before. And so, yeah, and I do get concerned that, because of that, because of the fear that, you know, ecology is dictating how we do business, that it will take longer just because of that, you know. But if we, you know, this is me thinking aloud too, but if we're able to identify that those that are there at the table can see some benefit in it, and I hope they do, then it would be easier. Before, you know, there were a lot of things that the planning unit, this is very easy, very new stuff, couldn't see the benefit at all because they were sure that the plan would be used against them. I mean, that's really what took quite a long time. And then throughout that process, that was the fear, that the plan would be used against us. Depending on who you are.
So it sounds like, and then this whole discussion in terms of funding may be academic, but Vanessa shows on Thursday with a draft contract in her hand. So, you know, I couldn't get all over today, so I'm at something of a disadvantage, and that my last discussion was 10 days, 2 weeks ago. However, that said, it sounds like the commissioners aren't inclined to enter into any kind of a contract with the facilitator until we have greater assurance in terms of funding and what I'm actually anticipating eventually seeing in the contract is not that we don't have the money, it's just how we can spend it, how far back we can reach it.
Actually, what I'm anticipating is that, I'm guessing that the planning unit, we're relying on them to recommend a consulting, you know, one of the firms that is submitted. And that'll take a little while. So.
We may not get a recommendation on Thursday, it might
Sure.
likely not be till February.
So, I'm hoping then, let's call it, not just thinking aloud, hoping that ecology moves on a contract by the time we end up with a recommendation.
And it may work out.
Yeah.
I mean, I do reserve in the back of my head, this all just may be simply that the legislature and in ecology, several lists of things to do as well, and they just aren't getting around to that 202 letter, because they're having to deal with the 201 letter, which are all due on February of this year, next year.
You can spend, yeah, they can spend a lot of time, I mean, their DGs can spend a lot of time thinking about what do you mean, legislature? That's the discussion, what do you mean?
And then, you know, there's still, I have to double check now, I don't think they actually have the final net ecological benefit guidelines out. That's draft. But
It's part of what do you mean process too, right?
Let's see, I think that's all I wanted to chat with you about on that subject today. Any observations or questions that I've put on? I have pledged to the planner for Tonasket that we will get started on the airport protection overlay.
Actually, I ran into that subject at lunch too.
By way of refresher, you have language in your comprehensive plan, you have the text in the zone code. What we do not have are the maps. So, well, we have maps, but we do not have adopted. I should say that. So we're gonna start with Tonasket. Recall, I did Rack and Robin, OMAC wasn't that interested in starting right now. Okanogan, kind of a different kettle of fish, we'll pick that up. We had a little bit of pushback from some of the Methow, although the state airport, I think, is interested in doing that. But Tonasket seemed like a likely place to start. So, what we will do in the end result, what you have is around your airport facility. They're not necessarily concentric, it's based on the operations of the airport, topography around it, and you know this better than I would. Your approach and your takeoff are different based upon topography and the way the airport's oriented, the way it operates, those sorts of things. So those zones parallel those considerations. And what you have is an overlay. You don't change the underlying zone, but you have an overlay that puts additional restrictions on what you can do there. So, no residential development, for instance, you take off an approach zone. You have different sorts of, even agricultural restrictions for things that would be bird attractants, that kind of stuff. So, in the end, what will come to you, and what I'm working on now, is the environmental review. Put together a checklist that will capture all of these different impacts. It goes out for public review because it's a land use control. It will go to the planning commission, then with their recommendation come back to you. Now, I am doing the checklist that isn't necessarily the way it would ordinarily work. I mean, theoretically, the city or the owner, actually more accurately, of the airport is the proponent, and they would prepare those baseline documents. I'm going to go ahead and do it because I understand most of the cities have contract planners at this point. They prepare them, they have, there are.
You know, the other point, Perry, would be that when we're dealing with the zone code, the area that we're talking about zoning is outside mostly the city's jurisdiction.
It'll be ours to enact. They can't enact.
Yeah.
But, you know, who's the proponent and who's not?
Yeah.
A discussion point, not particularly important on to the thing that just work out simpler in the final analysis. And then it's adopted as amendments to your zone map. So, but we'll get started on that and see if we can get it out. So, but in terms of doing, I don't think the planning commission won't see it at the January meeting. They could well see it at the February meeting, which means you can see it shortly after that.
So does the planning commission, you're thinking about having a look at Tonasket, have they seen any of the maps at all?
I don't, there may be some members on the planning commission that have from way back, none of them have. So it'll all go out to them when it goes out for the first public notice. Now, Ted, pull up the different maps that we have. We'll lay out essentially a critical path for all of them, try to get them all done, but our deal, if you will, was doing one at a time. So, anyway, that'll be starting up
forward to seeing how they react to it, because there was a lot of work done by advisory group that, with the town's involvements, that, should have been pretty well laid out. Obviously, you get out into those areas further out, the zones we have, what we call them zones. And it might, trigger some response from the planning commission, yes or no,
Well, that's what the
Because
public
it does,
process.
there's some areas where it has a profound, impact on land use.
Now, one question that I guess I would argue we've already answered before it's asked, but some might suggest or wonder why we're doing this now while we're redoing the comprehensive plan of response would be the language regarding essential public facilities, airports, and the comprehensive plan, there's been no proposed changes from the 2014 to the current plan, and the text is already adopted into the zoning code. We did that in 2016. So all of those steps have taken place. I don't believe the comprehensive plan currently under review will have any impact
How about the existing,
on
how about the existing comp plan,
the 2014 plan, or the previous to the 2014 plan.
64?
There's no discussion of that.
Public facilities, airports, there's no discussion about
No.
that.
There's some language about industrial zoning around some of them and that sort of thing, but nothing that prescribes the protection of the airports. And if I remember right, the RCW that encourages it was adopted since.
Oh, it was way later, but I was just curious, because if there was mention in a very comprehensive, broad way, pretty basically,
I remember there was in terms of some of your I think there was discussion on industrial areas. Go back and look, interesting.
Yeah,
I'll double
I
check.
can't remember how that worked.
But, we'll get started on it here. Under the banner of code enforcement, question I want to pose to commissioners, I actually gave two specific examples. The first is a cabin in the Methow, built without building permits. It, at the time, may or may not have been outside of the 50-foot setback, depending on where you set the ordinary high water mark. It's in the 100-year flood, there's a whole host of problems. This was the one that Dave was talking about the other day, where he sent it back to me for additional review. And what he's looking for, because it's a criminal charge, what he's looking for is essentially what I would call back in the old days a case summary report. So, here's the question I would pose to the commissioners. We're talking the approach you're most comfortable with. Now, we've talked about in the past, always trying to get people into compliance. We've given this particular individual every opportunity to either demonstrate to us that he could legally have done what he did, or come up with some other compliance plan, move it, tear it down, whatever. None of which he took. You do have, now let me put my old cop hat on now, you do have some challenges with the file, should we say. So envision, if you will, you have your river, depending on where you put the ordinary high water mark, he was or was not within the 50-foot, of course now it's more than 50 feet, so we have that whole question of vesting. When did he apply, what were the rules, we'll have to wrestle through that. You have an unsigned report from an engineer that put the corners above the 100-year flood. Our LiDAR shows it's well below the 100-year flood. One of the things we asked for was a signed engineer's report showing the work, establishing the elevation of the 4 points of the cabin. We couldn't get that. Now, this was Dave's point. He's right. I cannot force him to give me the evidence to convict him of a crime. So theoretically, I should get a search warrant, go on site with someone qualified to make that determination, and actually set the corners of that structure. That's how I would do an investigation, to charge somebody into district court on the crime of building without building. I can do that. That means I gotta hire someone with the credentials to do that. So, now, let's move on to the next concern. I was hoping Dan was,
Our LiDAR, is it the latest LiDAR that?
it is.
Yeah, Washington, well, that's accurate to within, I mean, it's like GPS.
I think we got it down, are we within, accurate within like 6 inches or something like that? Bob?
Less than that.
So keep in mind, I'm putting a dot on the ground based upon an aerial photo. This is one of the things that we always come up to, understand my burden of proof. Beyond a reasonable doubt. For a civil crime, it'd be preponderance of the evidence. It's not. Here's the next here, and I said, I wish Dan had been here because he has a hands-on experience. Let's assume I build my file, and I can do this. We're successful in getting charges. He's found guilty of building without a building permit or building within the 100-year floodplain, violation of the zone code, or building in violation of shoreline master program, or all the above, with a pylon charge. He's found guilty and pays his fine. Now, the last time Dan was successful in doing that was some time ago, and there was a sandbag house, which is still there. The perpetrator was punished for his misdeeds. But apparently there was no vehicle that was to force the person to actually tear the house down. So it's still on there. The objective, we had this discussion the other day, the objective is punishment, we were successful. If the objective is to get the cabin out of the supposed to be, we can get much done. So that takes me to the next item on your agenda. At some point, do the commissioners want to set up an abatement process? And here I'm talking one thing and one thing only, I'm talking budget. Let's assume we took the civil approach, not civil as in civilized, civil as in non-criminal. We go in and have this declared a nuisance because of the potential that it'll eventually there's more and go down the river and bang into a bridge above it or whatever. And I get a court order that says, yep, that needs to go. And he tells me, I have no money, I can't do it. Do we move it for him and put a lien against the time of the property?
How big's the cabin?
Size of a small park trailer.
The excuse that it is not livable is not valid.
Well, there's no plumbing, there's no, it doesn't
Pick
meet,
it up with a big forklift then.
you know, it to a point almost doesn't meet our definition of a residential structure. But it's still a structure he intended to live in part of the time. And it's within those various sensitive areas as identified by shoreline master program, the zone code, and the Methow review district.
Let's talk about this.
Anything get a
But,
permit,
let's talk about
it's too big, it needs permit.
Let's talk about budget. Okay, right now we're talking about a park trailer size house. Let's say we were talking about a 4,500 square foot long house.
Yeah, that's a different scenario.
I know. So, if we
But
want
nobody that's sane at all is gonna build a 4,500 square foot long house under those conditions. There's not too much to risk for them to lose financially.
wasn't it the Boy Scouts that say prepare for the worst and hope for the best? Right? So all I'm saying is consistency. I mean, if you're gonna have an abatement, program, that's great. Take all of the fees and fines and stuff and pour them into that abatement program. But are you gonna assess risk first to see if you should move it, or are you just gonna say, no matter what, we're gonna move it? Are you gonna
That would
assess
be-
cost?
That would be for you all to tell me as we craft our procedures for an abatement program. Does it have to have imminent public health and safety challenges or.
Did you have to have enough in the account to do it?
To do it,
Yeah.
I mean,
Can you do other, I mean, other counties I'm sure have this.
some do.
Can you give us some, I mean, not today, obviously, but can you look up
We
some?
can do some
examples?
research. I mean, if it's a non-starter, I won't certainly. If there's some interest, do some additional research and see what,
Well, if you find people and you put it back into the abatement. you know.
Now, one of the things, some, Department of Ecology, as an example, has kind of a running fine program. You identify a violation, and there's so much a day, and to correct it. I have no idea, but I have to probably get Dave to do some research. I have no idea how effective that is. I don't know if I'll run up a $250,000 fine, if they actually ever collect that, or what, I don't know. Some counties do that under an administrative fines program. I can't suggest I really know how that works either, because all pass, in my past life, all pass lead to the court. And they're the ones who eventually tell you what your fine is going to be. So obviously, an appeal process or something there, maybe that's the way to go. We just create regulation that is so onerous that eventually, and then you end up eventually through the hearing examiner into Superior Court. Where I'm going to with all this is on this particular one, Dave wants me to write, and I will, essentially an ultimatum letter. Move your cabinet within so many days or we'll prosecute you. Okay. I guess,
We'll do that.
I guess I'm looking for, if the commissioners are interested in, certainly I could add, or we will move your cabinet for you.
No,
And put a recording.
we don't have enough money. I mean, we don't have the money
I'm
to do that.
just posing the question. Suggesting the course
What
action.
do you do that?
So I'm crafting in my head my letter.
So,
It would be really tough for me to make a decision based on, I mean, but again, I'd have to assess, okay, what's the, how, if we go in and move it, how does that look? I mean, does that mean you pour a new foundation for them and you move it?
No.
Or does that mean you burn it? Because burning it is moving it too, it's just moving it somewhere else.
you can
When I say move,